Today we're talking about Satan.
Hit that bell.
No.
we can do this. We can do this.
Tanner, tell us about what Satan was to you growing up. How that idea formed in your brain as a young'un. How it evolved over the years.
How I accepted him as my personal demon.
Yeah.
Well,
how did you come to accept Satan as your personal demon?
So Mormons are taught that Satan was a child of God, one of the first children of God. Maybe the second. Jesus was first, and Satan was probably, Lucifer was probably second, son of the morning. And he rebelled against God's plan. God was like, I have this great plan. It's the one we've been using forever. And it works really good. It makes everyone turn into gods, or at least, most people. And Satan was like, I don't like that. I'm going to go. I'm not doing this. And he got kicked out to earth. And then, God created the Garden of Eden and put Adam and Eve in it and was like, don't eat the fruit or I'm going to kick you out of here. You're going to die. And Satan was the one that tempted them and tricked them and set this whole thing spiraling.
Okay, so Satan, the thing he got in trouble with God for, because wasn't it like him and Jesus were like brothers, they were tight?
Yeah.
They were a cozy little family. And
they were Cain and Abel before Cain and Abel.
So Satan wanted to have a different plan of salvation where everyone would automatically go to heaven.
Yeah.
And that was his big sin.
Yeah. And God was like, no, not everyone can go. And he was like, well, this sucks. And he's like, for instance, you can't go. Goodbye.
It seems like a harsh punishment. And it kind of makes God seem a little bit like, if you can't explain to your son why your plan is better, like, you're God. Like, you should...
Yeah, don't you want your kids to be better than you? Well, the dumb thing about it is, okay, the all-knowing God, creator of the universe, all-powerful, invents a plan that gets thwarted by his son. Like, isn't that a big red flag right there? Like, how is Satan gonna foil the plan? Like, wouldn't he just be playing out the plan of God? Like, wouldn't that be part of the plan? And if that is part of the plan, shouldn't God have a little bit of responsibility?
Okay, but doesn't God let Satan have power? Because it tested... Okay.
There must needs be opposition in all things. So that's what I'm confused
about. So I'm like, in your perfect plan, God, that you pitched before Satan pitched his plan, who was your Satan? You weren't assuming this son, or maybe you were. I don't know.
Yeah.
I have a lot of questions here.
I think he was, or
I think this is going to be like a stream of consciousness of me trying to process Satan, because I realized I've never really thought all these things through that much.
It's interesting to think, like, Mormons claim to be monotheists, but they're really not. Like, the way this story plays out, it's like any Greek, pantheon story, isn't it? It's like, oh, this god didn't like what the main god did, and so the main god was like, get out, and now you're a snake, and now you're a goose, and...
Okay, so God's like, no, we're not doing that plan, but I will let you get in on my plan as, destroyer of everything good.
And meanwhile, Satan, who has heard the pitch for the original plan, is like, I'm not gonna do it, and does it. Like,
does he say I'm not gonna do it?
Well, I mean, like, he's rebelling against God.
Your plan sucks, but then, so are we supposed to believe that God doesn't realize, like
doesn't really want Satan there?
That, or Satan doesn't realize that God is kind of using him, but then I'm like, Satan's heard all of us say it. So surely it's come into his mind at some point. Like, hang on a minute, am I just being used to carry out his plan? No, you didn't want his plan. That's what this whole thing was about. But you're willingly participating in it.
So this brings up some important kind of like theological perspectives, because for a lot of time in Christianity, particularly within like the Gnostic sects, Lucifer was not seen as the bad guy. Lucifer was the son of the morning. His name literally means light bringer. So he was the one who helped bring awareness. And sort of like in like the Hindu pantheon or the Hindu trinity, one of the gods in the Hindu trinity is the god of destruction, Shiva. And people don't look at that as like, oh, Shiva's evil because he destroys. It's like, no, entropy and falling apart is part of this whole cycle of life. Right. And that's what he represents. And Lucifer was sort of that same thing. He's the serpent in shamanic cultures all over the world represents death and rebirth, because snakes shed their skin, and also represents, healing and medicine, because a lot of medicine was coming out of like dealing with venom and poison from snakes. And so this serpent has this identification as a death and rebirth that comes through the bringing of light, of new awareness, of consciousness, and that's what the tree of life is. Like he says, you'll become as the gods, knowing good and evil, the consciousness to like distinguish between what is good and what is harmful.
Okay, so that's my next question. So Satan also then like gave them the fruit and like wanted them. It kind of
wanted them to do God's plan.
It kind of seems like the Garden of Eden was like the plan Satan was proposing, which is like everything's perfect, everyone gets to heaven.
Yeah, exactly.
So like, what's going on here? What am I not understanding? And then why would Satan, if them falling from grace was like integral to this God's plan being carried out, why would he tempt that to happen? It doesn't make sense.
No, it's literally the story like turned on its head. It does not make sense.
It doesn't make any sense. What's his motivation? Like, once again, I feel like, well, I know it's not just Mormonism, but the version we're talking about just has such a juvenile version of something that they haven't really thought through.
No.
And then
and then, like, it's like he hates us for our freedoms, you know? It's like the same mentality.
Yeah, just like every other country does.
It's nothing to do with the bombs we're dropping on them, trust me. And they're going to continue until morale improves.
Korihor in the Book of Mormon is just like such a... It's like that Joseph Smith, or whoever, but created a character that's just like so unbelievable. Because it's like... Why would you put a character like that in scripture instead of something that shows like just like the nuance of human behavior and like how people can believe things that are fucked up? Like, I don't know, instead it's this really weird like one-dimensional story that doesn't make any sense.
That's it. It's like a caricature because they don't understand
he knew that he lied. Okay, so if he knew that God was real but he lied, what was his motivation for lying?
Yeah.
Oh, a demon told him to? Then how's that his fault? It's like nobody thinks about people's motivations. They just ascribe like good and bad to stuff.
Because that's what they want to do, is they want to assume that everything you're doing because you're choosing to be bad, and everything I do, it's because I choose to be good, and that's why I deserve to go to heaven and you deserve to go to hell, and why I deserve to colonize your land and you deserve to suck my dick for all eternity. Like,
so weird.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've established that the Mormon concept of Satan, and that's just the basics of the concept. Like, there's so much more about him that doesn't make sense that's been taught.
Oh, yeah.
We asked you guys on, like, every platform what you were taught about Satan growing up. The most common answer we got, hundreds of people, was that he controls the water.
Yeah.
Is that in the Doctrine and Covenants?
In the Doctrine and Covenants. I don't even know if it says he controls the waters. I think it just says, like, he saw, like, the devil riding upon the waters, and
that's
like
why
somehow
you can't swim on Sunday.
And that's why you can't.
Why would the devil have more control on God's day over the waters?
I think it's one of those things that like is this culturally distorted thing that has like no actual bearing in doctrine, but people will justify it because it's like the best reason they can think of, rather than being like, oh, you missionaries can't swim because Satan controls the waters. It's like, or because it's against their insurance.
Policy.
Like it's a hazard. They don't want you to do it. Our bodies are 75% water.
I know.
So
I know.
No wonder Satan has such a hold on me.
But like Joseph Smith didn't know that.
No.
So once again. Also, like,
he only knew that tobacco was bad for you.
That was the one thing.
At a time when everyone was pushing. My
issue with Satan, or one of many issues, is like the good-bad binary it sets up. And I don't know about you, but when I was in Mormonism, it's very much taught that like something is either from God or it's from Satan. Mm-hmm. Like that's a binary. It's not one or the other. So like, I don't know, you could have a decision that you're like a little bit nervous about, and you could ascribe the nerves to Satan. Or there's just so many ways that can be interpreted by different people, especially people that have like, you know, mood disorders or various things.
I think you see that in religion, that religion exacerbates any kind of disordered personality, be it schizophrenia or bipolar. People will like latch on to these binary models of thinking.
Yeah.
And it makes everything so much worse. Like, it's so stressful, like, not only thinking that like, oh, is this God putting something in my head, or Satan, like one who wants to like save me and one who like absolutely wants to destroy me? And it's like, chances are it's like not that important of a thing.
I know.
And it's just you, and that's fine. Like,
I think I was definitely drawn to the binary thinking when I was like 16 and joining Mormonism, because growing up, like school and rules had been like my sense of safety. So I perceived being a good rule follower as like security. And so I think I was like really drawn to there's this set of rules, and this is, I remember like my seminary teacher saying that everyone who has a valid temporal recommend will get to the celestial kingdom, and just various things. But yeah, I think I was drawn to the rules, and the good bad binary played well with me. There's just certain people that are really drawn to that, and I do feel like it's a trauma response to really like cling to those to like rules and binaries, because it feels like safety and it feels like you can make sense of the world, whereas like trauma, it like doesn't make sense to a child and is so like overwhelming and everything. So yeah,
totally,
it's like the illusion of control, basically.
Yeah, which is what religion is.
Okay, so Eckhart Tolle said, literally translated from the ancient Greek in which the New Testament was written, to sin means to miss the mark, as an archer who misses the target. So to sin means to miss the point of human existence. It means to live unskillfully, blindly, and thus to suffer and cause suffering. And that goes so in line with our perspective on spirituality, which is that, you know, spirituality is about becoming conscious and aware of your conditioning so you're not led by it, and like breaking away from these stories and like experiencing life more fully and being more creative, being more connected to nature, like really being connected to what matters most, which is, you know, just like I am, so I'm gonna enjoy it. Expound on that.
Do something with that. Yeah, we have the church has this idea about sin that
it just means disobedience in Mormonism, doesn't it? And I'm like, there are endless examples of when disobedience is so good. Like when Brigham Young was the prophet, if you disobeyed and, you know, grumbling about all the racism, you get excommunicated. But like, surely God's down with that and is like impressed with that person. Like they're not going to not go to the celestial kingdom because they like stood up against racism.
In Nazi Germany, is it better to obey or? Yeah,
so this whole like idea of sin as just disobedience is like so juvenile and stupid.
Yeah, I remember getting to the point in kind of my exodus from the church of looking at, it said in the church that obedience is the first law of heaven. Yeah. And it's like, that's a terrible law of heaven.
Yeah, that's
like
authoritarian. I thought the whole issue with Satan's plan was that he wanted to deny people of their agency. But apparently obedience is, you can choose to be obedient or not, but if you don't, you're going to go to hell, sorry. Yeah. That's not a choice anyone's going to make. Like, yeah, because people who make that choice just don't believe in it.
That's another perfect example of like the whole thing being totally turned on its head.
Yeah.
And like meaning the exact opposite of the original intention.
Logic. So back to the little thing I just read from Eckhart Tolle and how sin means to miss the mark, miss the point of human existence. Well, I just feel like when you're caught up in like dogmas, you know, like the kind that Jesus condemned in the Pharisees, you do miss the mark of existence because you're so caught up in these binaries and these rules. And like, if you see sex workers as bad people, then you're like caught up in this good bad binary. And like, I feel like everything Jesus did was showing people to not ascribe to those binaries, to not ascribe to those stories, because all those stories cloud like the most beautiful parts of being a human, which is like, you know, empathy and connection, and like, I don't know, clouds our ability to sort of see above our limited ego and get kind of a wider perspective on everything and how it's all interconnected. So I just feel like reading this, I mean, I'm not like a biblical scholar, so I have no idea, but that makes so much sense to me that it would mean that. Like when I read the words of Jesus, I'm like, that makes sense.
It's like we all just, you know, we inherit the culture that we're born into as this assumed program that nobody is like consciously creating. It's just inherited systems from the past. And those can be like really flawed and really, you know, prejudice or whatever. And Satan or, you know, demon figures are used as like a way of scaring people into conforming to like old bad systems, rather than seeing the point, which is that you are a free agent. That like it's not about just like this white and black, good and evil. It's like life is complex and there are like complex goods and complex evils and a lot of like crossover, and there's just plain old mistakes. And at the end of the day, you're just like choosing what feels right. And like it'll be different for everybody.
And these Heidemar religions that like really narrow your experience to just this very limited lane, which means, you do miss the complexity. What kind of God would want to give a commandment, or not a commandment, but taken as a commandment? What kind of God would want to say something like, don't drink tea, and then not explain why? What kind of God would want, you know, 13-year-old girls to be coerced into marriage without even explaining why? Like, that's just encouraging his children to not develop critical thinking skills. And if you can't develop critical thinking skills, how can you advance in intelligence? I thought the glory of God was intelligence.
There you go.
And also, even with less arbitrary stuff, obviously don't kill people or something. It's like, you should be cultivating, and ideally your community should, and society you live in and the church you're a part of should be helping you cultivate this. You should be cultivating a sense of empathy for humans where you don't want to do things that cause suffering. And murder's an easy one, I guess, because no one wants to murder. It's too much work. But
the one drawback. I got plans.
The ugly thing. But it just doesn't make sense to it doesn't make sense to create people and say you want them to develop their agency and then just tell them what to do and say obedience is the first law of heaven. If you disobey, then you're not going to get to the celestial kingdom. It's bullshit. You're making people more stupid. And you're blocking their in Buddhism and other religions. There are practices that people do to deliberately grow their sense of empathy. That's not really happening in Mormonism because good and bad is already so defined, except it's defined by these weird bullshit things, and the church is fine with causing people suffering because their model of morality is not does it cause people to suffer, it's just arbitrary.
And their practice of developing empathy is still so ineffective because it's they have this thing of I'm this horrible, awful person that deserves hell, but I go and I pray on Sunday and take the sacrament that Jesus forgives me, and because he forgives me, I guess I can forgive other people. But it's in this weird passive aggressive way of I don't agree with them, but I will forgive them.
Judge them anyway.
I will pardon them, and it's but you haven't actually tried to understand where they came from. And that's what the atonement, the at-one-ment is really all about. Is they said that Jesus suffered according to the flesh that he might know according to the flesh the things that make us hurt, and therefore the primary Christian responsibility ought to be trying to own that same level of empathy, of being able to try to really understand what a person felt and experienced that motivated them to act in this way. And once you do that, you won't want to judge them, just like Jesus doesn't want to be their judge. Jesus is the advocate, and you'll want to too, because you see that everyone is trying to do the best that they can with what they're given. If people are even sociopaths or psychopaths, it's to a degree not their fault. There's certain behaviors that we just can't accept as a society, and that there needs to be consequences for.
Well, saying it's not their fault and saying we accept them is very different. That's a free will discussion, but which we've had.
But that's an extreme example. All I'm saying is that I don't know what I'm saying. I lost myself.
I love how I was not downstairs this video, and now I'm getting fired up the more I think about it.
Your own personal redemption of Satan is your own personal redemption. Because, once you can empathize with your most bitter enemy, they cease to become your enemy in the same way. And then they
love your enemy.
Yeah, and they lose the power. They lose
Jesus
a power over you.
I can't think of a Jesus quote where he talks about Satan.
In the Bible, he casts out demons and talks about Satan. But it's
standard ayahuasca trip.
yeah. And he's living in a time where they don't have modern medicine, and they're looking at these disease or something and saying, oh, it must be
possessed by a demon.
Demons, and we can of course look at that now and be we see it a little different now. But it's weird how saying once you can have sympathy for the devil, like Mick Jagger says, then really it gives you clarity on what's actually happening. Getting out of this Santa Claus inverted Santa Claus story. And it's weird how Mormons they try to avoid talking about him too much, or watching horror movies where Satan is portrayed as a real powerful entity. And it's so weird how their biggest fear is of treating Satan like he's real, because then that will make him real. It seems so obvious that he's the embodiment of your fear, and once you realize that there's nothing to fear, then Satan disappears, and that perfect love casteth out that fear.
Yes. It's so infuriating because I'm this. Once again, it's I really like Jesus, and I feel it's so bullshit. The way that people have just taken the idea of him and ran with it in these absurd directions. When members will ask us, or even non-members will say, why do you spend so much time talking about a religion that you left? I feel this is the reason why this stuff is like, Satan isn't just this like benign boogeyman. There's like, number one, the impact he has on like children's psyches and stuff, like that's all very real. But also it's just like promoting this binary concept of good and bad, limiting people's like ability to cultivate empathy because they don't really see a need to, because it's like we have these rules and Mm-hmm. And again, like when you see things through a good and bad binary, you aren't able to empathize because the bad stuff just gets lumped in and you're not seeking to understand it because you've labeled it bad. You don't need to understand it necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Which is why I think so many Mormons will have, be supporting Trump, because it's like they don't take the time to go into the issues. Like, so like with child sex trafficking, we just had that whole Wayfair conspiracy, and Mormons are very much like on it whenever there's like a child sex trafficking conspiracy theory. Like they feel a lot of empathy for that. They're there. Mm-hmm. They really care about it.
Especially if it makes Trump look like a good guy.
Yeah, God. And that's why Trump does it, obviously. But I listened to this podcast about human trafficking, and it just like blew me away how much it's just another one of those issues where the things that are going to make it better is easier path to immigration, making sure no kid goes hungry, like providing for people, like essentially government social programs, like the things that Republicans are all against, but then they all hop on the child sex trafficking bandwagon as like...
we have this this system that just happens for no reason, like just because people are evil.
And it's like gay LGBTQ young people are more likely to end up in the system because of the discrimination they face from people like you who are writing the policies that discriminate against them. So it's like, it's so easy to be like, oh, child sex trafficking, that's awful. Ooh, like we all know that that's awful. We all feel gross when we think about child sex trafficking. But it's such a like juvenile, limited understanding to just be like, oh, well, I condemned this thing, so like I've done the work. And it's like, you haven't done the work to understand the issue enough to know how you are contributing to it by voting for these people that are making it worse. It's like, that's why we fight for all these things all year round. Like the social programs, all connected. Everything bad, like more bad stuff happens when you have a society where people don't have their basic needs met. That makes murder more likely, like gang activity more likely. Everything bad is more likely, but you can't see that. So again, it's just like promoting this simplistic view of the world that is like, it's like Satan himself is almost like a thought-terminating cliche in a way, because it's like, oh, that's Satan. Okay, no need to look any more at it then. I'm getting riled up.
Well, and I'm so glad you've gone this direction, because it's easy to see how Christianity, how Jesus, like truly taught a liberation theology, and then once Constantine took it over and realized like this gospel, this message, this movement can be used as a way of enforcing control and reducing freedom by convincing people who are like forced, you have to obey, and adhere to these rules, and that's how you'll get your salvation. Like they turned the thing on its head, and it's only got worse. And the idea of restoration that Joseph Smith brought in, of like, oh yeah, religion comes in cycles, and it does. Most human organizations that start out with a charismatic leader, be it a cult or a business or whatever, and usually the lines are pretty a crossover there, but it happens. You have this charismatic figure, people go to flock to them, and then eventually the charismatic leader dies, and it becomes just this organization that then tries to perpetuate the vision while also just trying to perpetuate itself. And that's what's happened with the church here. It's like it's become the McDonald's of religion, and it's way different than what the founder wanted, way more different than what the original Jesus founder wanted, and it's just used as a form of coercion. And they're trying to teach you that it's like straight up 1984 shit, that like freedom is slavery, like if you obey, that's the way that you be free. And it's like, that is not it at all. Like, do you hear the double speak?
Open 1984 language.
And it's so obvious why Christianity is the face of American fascism today, because you have to maintain that sense of order and that binary, that you're evil and I'm good, you're led by Satan, and the Trump's doctor that was plugging his shit today of, you're having sex with demons and demon semen.
Don't tell me anything. Ugh. It's upsetting how Satan limits people's ability to think critically and examine themselves, Because you another thing, you've been taught your whole life that if any time you start doubting the church, that's Satan. Anything that makes you think the church is true, that's God. So you could have, you know, some bishop coercing young girls into doing things, and those young girls could think, well, he's a bishop, so this is from God. You know what I mean?
That's literally what happens.
Yeah, I mean, you can see how it gets abused. But even outside of, like, overt abuses, just, like, if you can't entertain something as a possibility, and I feel like with this good, bad binary, there are so, you know, you have such limited things you can sort of consider, then you're just, like, doomed to not progress intellectually or spiritually, emotionally.
What are the odds that every single person happened to be born in the right religion with the right ideology, and like Satan's greatest work is to like get you to think outside of your bubble? Like, it's so dumb.
Yeah, that's so true.
You assume that other people in other religions are deceived, you know, being led by Satan, and then it's like, well, what if they're questioning their religion? What if they're feeling cognitive dissonance? And they're like, well, is that Satan if they're feeling cognitive dissonance leaving their religion? Or...
I think an integral part of a spiritual awakening, which Jesus taught, is getting away from your long-held belief systems that you've just had conditioned into you. Like, that's like an essential part of sort of evolving spiritually, right? Is realizing, like, these are the things I believe because I was taught them, and, you know, like, them being able to get outside of that. But then in Mormonism, you're taught that anything that goes outside of that is from Satan. So again, it's like built into the belief system, is like, don't stray from the belief system, obviously. But it sucks. It makes it a lot of work for people to get out. And that's why, like, ex-Mormons will, like, leave the church, not believe in it at all, and still, like, feel like Satan has some control over them. Because it's been so conditioned in them for, like, decades of their lives.
Nuts. I was never like that. Once I could, like, understand that something was right or wrong, like, I was just like, eh.
Yeah.
But I know that's
why you left.
Yeah.
Same. Yeah. Oh, so I'm just, like... I know it's like nothing new, but I'm just having a whoa moment right now where just so much of Mormonism like is set up in a way that limits people's ability to think critically. So of course they support Trump, of course like they believe all these crazy things.
Because the more you think critically, really the more it falls apart.
Regular intelligence, emotional intelligence, because emotional intelligence is the ability to like recognize and honor your emotions and those in others as well. But it's like in Mormonism, there's a whole bunch of emotions that they're bad, so that's sin and that's Satan. So you're immediately dismissing the experiences of most people in the world by being, you know, with that kind of mindset.
And yourself.
But then in yourself, yeah, you have difficult feelings, maybe you're grieving, you know, like how many
Anger.
people have we heard say that they had a family member die and people... you would almost get like shamed for grieving so hard because it's like you should just be so happy and positive that they're in the celestial kingdom now.
Yeah.
So it's almost like not allowed to grieve.
You're not.
Yeah,
having faith.
you always have to attach some like. But I know that it's just like it just robs you of developing emotional intelligence, Mormonism, because you have to see everything through this lens of like, oh, is this thought from Satan or from God? It's like that's the worst way you could try and teach a child to be emotionally self-sufficient. That people are just like. People who are raised in Mormonism are like raised codependent with a theoretical idea. Is there anything worse? It's like you can be codependent with like this idea of your partner that you have in your head, but this is like next level shit.
Well, it's codependent with the institution.
Yeah.
It's that you're forced to just have like a childlike understanding so that you depend on the institution. People
will have like questions that they should ask a therapist or like things going on and they don't know what's going on in their mind and they'll talk to their bishop. And the bishop will just give like who knows what advice, you know?
Like some farmers.
When it's like there's probably some like that I know.
No disrespect to farmers.
But there's valid psychological explanations for so many things, and just when you see everything through that lens, it's like you're not going to get any good answers because it's just not true. But if you're like seeing how your mind works through the lens of God and Satan, you're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to get very far.
And he is a boogeyman. Like Mormons think they're so sophisticated because they don't believe in like a horned red goat being, and it's like we've reached the height of theology.
We're going to go over to Patreon and read out some of the things you guys were taught about Satan growing up. We're just gonna do a little experience share.
But as you know, talking about Satan draws him in, so be prepared beforehand that Satan will probably show up in the room, and I don't know, invite us to some kind of orgy or something.
Hope so. Thank you to our patrons for making quality content like this possible. If you want to watch the bonus Satan video we're doing, you can pledge any amount on Patreon, even $1 a month.
We're easy.
And, yep, that's it. What was your favourite part of this video? What do you think about Satan?
Tell Sam she did so good and was so funny and smart
I have no
and beautiful.
energy to do this.
Because she needs to hear that next time it's going to be so fun.
I had no energy and then I got so riled up and now I'm like, I should have turned it down.
No, we did good.
This is the unlikable persona that people are going to go after.
Thanks, everybody.
Fuck Satan!